Engraving is the process of carving designs into the surface of metal, whether it be on firearms, knives, jewelry, and many other different types of items. The topic of this video is hammer and chisel engraving, which is the traditional method where you use a small hammer to strike the back of the chisel. This creates progression marks in the actual engraving, which varies in appearance from the more modern pneumatic engraving tools. And like a lot of craftsmen, I make many of my own tools. I start out making the handles with 3/8 inch cold rolled steel, mounting it into my metal lathe. In this video, I'll only be showing you the process of making a single tool, but in most cases I would make multiples of them at a time. Most of your time in machining parts is in the setup, so while you have a tool set up for a certain procedure, it's best to go ahead and do multiples. The first step after mounting your stock into the chuck is turning down a shank 1 inch long to 1/4 of an inch in diameter. In the case of this part, I don't have to be super exact, so I just check my progress with a pair of calipers, and then once I hit that 1/4 of an inch, I use my knurling tool to just knurl the part that will be inserted into the handle. This gives it a little extra grip, and then afterwards I put a small chamfer on it just to aid it in going into the hole in the handle. With that taken care of, I extend the stock out and part it off at an overall length of 2 inches. Next, I flip the piece and remount it back into the lathe. I take a face cut and get it ready to drill out the hole that the tool steel will be inserted into. I start this process with a center drill and then finish off the hole with a 1/8 inch drill bit. With this hole drilled, we now need to drill another hole which will be tapped for a set screw. This set screw will be what holds the actual tool steel into the handle. The hole is drilled in the drill press in a V-block, and then afterwards it is tapped with a tap that the taper has been ground off. This allows you to go all the way to the bottom of the hole and not have that taper interfere and stop you short of the depth that you want to achieve. After the hole is drilled, the piece is remounted in the lathe, holding it by the knurled end of the head. A small chamfer is added to help guide in the tap, and the threads are cut. The threads I tapped are a 1032 thread count, so afterwards I check them with a small set screw. The final few cuts are made by turning the compound slide to 84 degrees and then turning a taper to just past the tapped hole. With the taper turned, I take a light cleanup pass on the outside diameter of the tool. It's not necessary, but some 400 grit sandpaper shines the piece right up. With the head of the tool complete, I'll now turn my attention to its wooden handle. I start out just like the metal, making a facing cut, preparing to center drill, and then follow up with a 1/4 inch drill bit, drilling to about a 1 1/8 inch deep hole. Afterwards, I'll put a little bit of super glue on the knurls of the head and then into the hole in the handle. After After using the tailstock to press in the head, I use that same 84-degree angle to clean up the transition between the wooden part of the handle and the head. The final step in the machining process is cutting the handle to length and then rounding over its end. I pull the whole piece out of the chuck, mark it to length, and then put it back in the chuck. I use a hacksaw to cut it to length and then file a little radius on the back end of the chisel. Well, at this point, it's a perfectly fine engraving handle, but I like to take the additional step of applying a stain. This is Minwax Red Oak stain, so it just darkens it up quite a bit, and you just want to let that stain sit on there for 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then wipe it off. Once it's all wiped off, I spray on a coat of Minwax Satin Polyurethane. The next day, the polyurethane is dry but not completely cured, so what I like to do is just in a rag, just rub the handle pretty good, and that smooths it right up. And then it is all good to go. You're looking at a totally finished engraving handle, and this will last for quite a few years. And once again, when I make these, I make multiples at a time. For the engraving that I'm working on, I'm using a 1/8 inch carbide blank. That's what I start with, and then grind it to shape on a bench grinder with a green wheel mounted in it, and that particular wheel is capable of grinding carbide. Then afterwards it's followed up on a diamond stone and then a ceramic stone to sharpen it, and these tools are ground out using a jig or either freehand. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you all enjoyed seeing the process of making this engraving tool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you'd like to see more, head on over to my channel where I've got a wide variety of topics covered in videos. And if you're not already a subscriber, click the red button on the screen now and you'll get updates when I post future videos.